Oh, come in, come in. Ah, I'm glad you could call round again. It's such a... Karen, do you know, I may put my jacket on. I see you've got a jumper on. It's such a cold summer. Cold July. I feel I should put the heating on again. Anyway, come away over here. I so often already got a book off the shelf. You know, whenever I visit somebody, the first thing I do is look along their bookshelves. Because I'm always, you find out, it's almost laying open the map of a person's soul to look at their bookshelves. And if you come along and have a look here, there's some of my own books up there. Lots of Lewis here, but look at this wonderful portrait of Samuel Johnson that my great friend, the artist Ross Wilson, has just sent me. We must do some more reading of Johnson together. I love that. That's a great portrait. Anyway, if you look along here, I mean, you probably can't see all the way past me. Holy Grail, Tristan, Arthur, it's a trilogy of books there. The Mort Data, Mallory, Legends of King Arthur. Have a little look, we got, this is a slightly eccentric chap called Matthews on Arthur. What have we got here? Oh, this is William Morris, the Earthly Paradise, actually. It's not quite Arthurian. In Search of the Holy Grail, The Age of Arthur, Once and Future King, Quest for Merlin, Nikolai Tolstoy. That's a very interesting book. Westerns from ritual to romance. A whole kind of Arthurian library, really, and that's not all of them. Up here, actually, I should take this out. Oh, here's this amazing edition of Tennyson's Idylls of the King with extraordinary plates. Very beautiful. So, all my Arthuriana. This book, very interesting book. The Inklings and King Arthur. J.R.R. Tolkien, Charles Williams, C.S. Lewis and Owen Barfield on the Matter of Britain. Edited by Serena Higgins. Now, this was a significant book for me in various ways, not least because I was called on, as you'll see at the end of here, to write the concluding chapter that summed it all up. So, do come over and sit down. And get this Sherlock Holmes Lestrade. It's an absolute favourite pipe of mine. This, I think that sort of bent apple shape is just it's so comfortable to the hand. It's one of my favourite Peterson shapes. So, when we were reading Tolkien the other day and talking about stories and the power of story and that glorious moment when they realise they might be in a story and how that gives them courage and how they remember the tale of Beren and Sam and Frodo kept going, I sort of digressed from that and said, look, that sense of the power and enchantment of story and of the way a story that is a story or a legend or a great mythic tale, it may not be history in the strictest sense, but it has an influence on history in that real people in actual lives and times, yourself and myself, for example, can be transformed and encouraged by story. It can have an impact on life. And I said, I think at the time, that that was one of the reasons why, perhaps it's the folly of my age, but that I was going to have a go and read, as you know, because I've been reading bits to you. I have been having a go at taking up the great tale of my own nation, the Matter of Britain, as it's called, the Arthurian stuff. And I'm not sure if I told you this as the exact, but I can tell you it now. So, it's been under wraps for a while, but I've been working on this endeavour for some time, and there's more still to do, a great deal more still to do. But it's now official that I have a publisher, and it's the Rabbit Room Press. And they completely share the vision with me, and we're going to bring this thing out over several years in 4 volumes. And we've got this wonderful illustrator who did that picture, Stephen Crotts, whom you met when he was with me when you came into this room sometime before. So, all this Arthurian stuff is coming to the fore, and in fact, as well as this book, Those are the ones on the shelves. This here, piled on my great-grandfather's old Victorian writing desk, are the volumes I'm working with now. The Roger Lancelin Green, Arthur Rackham illustrated. It's a Swinburne poem there. And these are the three manuscript books in which I've been writing out the verses longhand and also making notes and plans for the whole thing. So, anyway, the first volume of the four is more or less complete and will come out not next year but the year after, because I've got to write some more to be going for it, with Rabbit Room. And one of the things I'm doing this volume, the first volume I'm going to publish, although it's later in the arc of the tale, is stuff on the Holy Grail. But I'm going to have various appendices at the end of it, rather like Tolkien has the appendices at the end of the Lord of the Rings, setting out some more of the background. I've got an appendix about the wasteland and an appendix about all the Arthurian sources and where the stories come from. But I've just finished writing these appendices, and which will come out in the first volume. Here's the manuscript of the poetry of the first volume, and here's the typescript of the appendices. But I start the appendices with a kind of introduction, an overview of the whole project, in which I try to express as well as I can what's drawn me to it, the deeper reasons, what's drawn me to it, why I'm doing it, what it is about these stories that enchanted me as a child, and what it is about that I think is still deeply relevant to the times we live in, and perhaps to the great challenge of our age, which is to shake off the shackles of reductive materialism and re-enchant the world. I think we need to bring the great stories of the past to our aid in doing that. So I thought it might be nice, just to give you a taste of it, to read you the opening little section, which is the introduction and overview to this whole project as I conceive it, and as I now have Rabbit Room on board with bringing into the world. So I imagine, of course, this won't be a manuscript. This is what you'd read if you had the book in your hand. And it goes like, my little introduction goes like this. And you'll see that Tolkien and Lewis and the Inklings, that book indeed, I've just written, come into it. Introduction and overview. This book is the first instalment of a project I've contemplated for many years, an epic retelling of the legends of King Arthur. I have loved these stories since I was a child, and I heard them from my mother, who was a great storyteller herself, but also had extensive knowledge of the medieval sources, especially the great gathering of these stories and their rendering into Middle English by Sir Thomas Malory in the 15th century. So the stories that first moved me were not some sanitized Hollywood version, but the real thing, haunting, numinous, continuously suggestive of the holy and beautiful reality of God and his saints and angels, shimmering through the fabric of the stories of the knights with all their aspirations and all their human flaws. At the heart of those early versions of the stories is the Holy Grail itself, the presence of Christ and his gospel moving as an unbearably beautiful light through the mists and magic of pre-Christian Celtic Britain, drawing even the wizards and the fairy folk towards himself, baptizing the imagination of our ancestors, fulfilling and disclosing the true meaning of our earliest stories. As a student at Cambridge, I rediscovered these stories in their original sources, and became aware of how so many modern versions of them seem to marginalise or even erase the deep spiritual and indeed Christian impulse that had formed in their original telling. And as a poet, I longed to restore that lost element in the hope that a new telling might baptise the imagination of the growing generation, brought up in a secular world, trapped in the immanent frame, and deprived of their inheritance in the gospel. I saw how beautifully writers like Lewis and Tolkien had reawakened our desire for the marvellous and mysterious, and how their stories, often drawing subtly on Arthurian motifs, had reached out with truth and beauty to so many who had scarcely known, until they turned the pages of Narnia and the Lord of the Rings, how much they longed for these tales of imagination, and how these tales had reawakened what Lewis, in The Weight of Glory, called that inconsolable secret, our yearning for the far-off country, which we glimpse when, for a while, the veil is lifted, and we see how God moves in and through his creation and draws us back to him. And then I mention in this appendix that will come out, I mention this book. I say, I wrote the concluding chapter for the major study, The Inklings and King Arthur. In that chapter I wrote about Lewis, Tolkien and Charles Williams, saying, and this is now a quote from this book, though all three of these writers were more than capable of making their own imaginary worlds, and two of them did so with unparalleled success, all three were nevertheless drawn again and again to the numinous worlds of Camelot and Avalon, and to the intriguing and tragic figure at their heart, Arthur himself, the once and future king. End of quote from my thing. I wondered then if I might be called to take up the tale myself, learning from these masters, and make an epic poem that would appeal to many of their readers and continue their vital mission to slip past the watchful dragons of secularism and awaken again in the modern world that openness to beauty and mystery which prepares the heart for the coming of Christ. In That Hideous Strength, the novel by C.S. Lewis, in which Merlin returns and finds there's still a Pendragon and Arthur in Britain, Lewis suggests that there is a kind of good haunting, that modern Britain, for all its apparent shallowness and apostasy, still remembers and can respond to the deep meanings and values of these old tales, the courtesy, the ritual, the sacramental vision. So Lewis writes, and this is from That Hideous Strength, something we may call Britain is always haunted by something we may call Logres. Have you noticed that we are two countries? After every Arthur, a Mordred. Behind every Milton, a Cromwell. A nation of poets, a nation of shopkeepers. Don't you feel it? The very quality of England. If we've got an ass's head, it's by walking in a fairy wood. We've heard something better than we can do, but can't quite forget it. Can't you see it in everything English? A kind of awkward grace, a humble, humorous incompleteness. This is one of the characters saying this, a chap called Dennis, I think. It's a beautiful passage, and it's a fascinating thing that this kind of good haunting, as he calls it, the sense of this beautiful, numinous, spiritually vivid realm within the realm, kind of the land of fairy within it. And it seems to me that we see that sort of opened and unveiled so often in the Arthurian stories. And so that's just a little bit of the beginning, and it's about the kind of thing that I was hoping to do. And I go on a little bit later to say, my aim is to make a poem that restores the spiritual elements that have been shorn away and renews their deepest meaning. The whole poem, if I live to complete it, will be a series of 12 books. It's a tradition following Homer, Virgil, Milton and Tennyson that an epic consists of 12 books, which will come out in a series of 4 volumes, each volume containing 3 books. And then I say, because this is going to be in the first book, I say, you have the first of these volumes in your hands. Well, you don't have it in your hands yet, but I hope one day you will. It begins as Aristotle suggested epics should begin, in medias res, in the midst of things, with this cycle of ballads telling the legend of the Holy Grail, the inner meaning of all that came before and all that follows afterwards. Having given you some account of my own take, my own understanding of the cluster of stories that make up the matter of Britain, I shall also give you a brief overview of the major sources, and then my appendix goes on to the sources. But I thought I set out there, reading it to you from the manuscript, but I set out there, you know, as clearly as I can, something, if you like, of not only my love for the material, but my sense of what it means. And there's some other passages I might read you later from that, actually reflecting on things like the Queen's funeral and the nation coming awake or coming to itself at that moment and remembering its hallows. I might read you that passage on another occasion. But I thought you might be interested to know. So that is what's taking up a lot of my time, and that is what I write my poetry out in longhand in a fountain pen. And then I take it off of here and transpose it onto a computer and revise it. But then when the next revisions happen, I have to print it out like this. And then I make corrections on the side, you know, in pen on a manuscript like this. So it's quite a process, but it's a labour of love, and I hope I will live to complete it. I've completed, it seems like I've been doing it for some years already, I've completed a quarter of it. And the rest is still to come over the coming years of the next 3 or 4 years. So anyway, that's one of the things that sometimes keeps me out of mischief. And I'll raise this glass of old peculiar to your health. Thanks for calling around.